Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. This session is about practical teaching techniques with iAchieve, and I hope very much it will give you some really useful insights into how to actually conduct teaching using iAchieve from a classroom point of view. And we know from our end at iAchieve that very often the school purchases iAchieve, and it quite often a senior leader that we're dealing with at that point, and they hand it on to somebody to teach, and it's all lovely, it's all shiny, it's great, but sometimes the question is, what do we do with this? How is the best way to use it? What's the best techniques for actually using it in the classroom? And we're really lucky this morning to have Maureen DeLonghi with us. Maureen is a great friend to iAchieve and has been for many years, but she's also got a wealth of experience, as well as being a senior leader and department head and senior teacher in a school. She's got a very long experience of working with vocational qualifications and online vocational qualifications at that. In fact, I know Maureen's been doing training on online vocational since at least 2007, and I think possibly even earlier than that. So we're really lucky that Maureen is going to share some of her expertise with her. So without further delay, I'll hand over to Maureen, and she can get started. So many thanks, Maureen.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you for making me feel so old. So I just wanted to start by saying that my sort of background is as a modern languages teacher. And I say that just because I want you to sort of see how the whole vocational and online vocational idea is often shipped out to people who are not specialists. And so these resources were my absolute godsend when, as a senior leader, I was given a group of failing students and told we need to get them these resources, we need to get them these qualifications. And it was literally through using these resources that I was able to achieve that. So what I'm hoping to do today, as the title suggests, it's practical teaching techniques. And what I want you to be able to do is to go into school tomorrow or Monday and plan what you're going to do, and to just feel confident that you can use these resources straight away. I'm sort of delivering it in as if it's something that you've just received and have never done before. I'm obviously aware that some of you have taught it before, and I'm very experienced. So please do feel, if you've got some suggestions and ideas that you want to sort of jump in with and suggest, please do that, because obviously we're all sort of in this together, and it works really well if we're all working collaboratively. So Alice is going to be monitoring the chat. Please feel free to raise your hand or to just put a little message in the chat, and then she can relay those messages, or take yourself off mute and just shout out some suggestions. We're not a huge group, so it works quite well if we just work that way and keep it quite interactive. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to share my screen with you now, and we'll start sort of going through the resources. Okay, so the first thing really that I just wanted to say was that it's just really important that you have a really good set of resources to teach it with, but also that you get quite familiar with the practicalities of teaching it and implementing the qualifications, because it is something that's quite different. And I think one of the things that lockdown has shown us is that having these online possibilities just gives us so many extra strings to our bow. And it's taught us ways of using online qualifications in a slightly different way, and it's actually given us a lot more scope. So this meeting is going to hopefully go through all of those possibilities. And I just wanted to talk really about how flexible these resources have been for me in the past. I've taught them in a lot of different ways. I've started out using them as a whole class teaching implement right from the front of the class. When I first started teaching it, I had a little bit of background knowledge, but it was those resources that I craved. I didn't want to be making a lot of PowerPoints and extra things that I had to show from the front. And so I would literally use the iAchieve resources from the front of the class and teach the whole class. But I was also aware that I could use it for teaching smaller groups who were perhaps working in the library because they've been removed from mainstream classes, or students that were working at home. And in the last couple of years, since we've discovered Zoom, actually teaching smaller groups that aren't even in school, sharing my screen through Zoom with them. It's also a really useful tool for students to work independently. So we've had students in the past who are long-term school refusers, and because of the interactivity of the platform, they can work away from school, working from home independently, and I can then be able to monitor how they're doing. Even in the classroom, it works quite well to be able to maybe present the initial materials from the front, but then students go off to their workstations and work independently at their own pace. And some of them, because we've got a wide range of abilities in that class, some of them will go through really quickly and will then be able to get the extended materials. Some of them will just need to go through everything I've already showed them again, but maybe with a TA supporting them to go through it a bit more slowly. So it gives them that flexibility. The other thing is that you can set them tasks to complete. You can tell them exactly, because it's set out in terms of lessons and sessions, you can tell them which bit you want them to do, so they can flip their learning and pre-read some of the resources before the lesson, or be set to complete some follow-up work at home. And the other thing is that there's a lot of really good downloadable resources on the platform that can then be downloaded and printed as hard copies, as paper copies. They can put those into a folder. They can use those for revision. They can use those to practice assessments for home learning, etc. So you've got a whole range of ways of doing it. And I suspect what most people will do is a little bit of all of them. And it's a mix and match what suits your class best. Before starting to embark on the course, though, I think it's just so important to plan. I think in the past, one of the failings of some teachers was that they just thought, well, if I just start working through the resources, that's fine, which is fine because you will cover the curriculum, but you have to be so aware of when the NCFE assessments are, because those are not set by iAchieve. Those are set externally by NCFE, and if you don't hit those dates, your students will not pass. So you really do need to plan when you're going to be teaching and what you're going to be teaching and how long you can spend on different sessions. And of course, that's going to also depend on the nature of your curriculum setup. If you've only got 2 lessons a week, you're going to have to whiz through some things quite quickly. Whereas if you've got 5 lessons a week, you can take your time. And also, presumably, you will have some students who are more able, some who are less able, some who will be special needs. So you're going to have to control the pace of the lessons for them, depending on the students that you have. So I'm just going to start taking you through really how I did that initial curriculum planning process. And I started out by identifying the must-haves. I know how many lessons I've got. I can then spread my lessons accordingly. But I also have some key dates that I can't move. Not just the NCFE key dates, but some school key dates. We have drop-down days where they're not having lessons. Now, if it happens that I would have had a double lesson on that day, that's really messed up my planning for that week. So I need to be aware of that beforehand so that I can really be ready for that. The next step was creating a map with all of the course content, all of the assessments, but also all of the school dates and objectives that I need to make sure that I hit. And if I mapped that out in advance, I knew then I could plan my individual lessons within that map. And that enables me to ensure that I'm the planning of my individual lessons is guided through those key principles so that I know when I can fit in all the assessments. The other thing is that I know there are some of the things that I can whiz through quite quickly, but there are some of the other sessions that I really need to take a bit more time over, because the students need to not just have the materials presented, but they need to be able to really embed that learning. And in order for them to learn it deeply, I need to perhaps include some other strategies, and I need to make sure I've allowed time for that in my curriculum. So this is just a shot of the initial stage of my curriculum map. You can see I've got the dates there. we work on a 2-week timetable. So I've got week A and week B, so I can keep in mind that slightly different timings. The bits that I've put in red are the bits that I cannot move. They're my must-haves. And I've got things in the calendar, for example, those search days where there's no lessons, but I've also got days, things like the open evening where there was an early closure and I ended up missing lessons because of that. I've got school assessment dates. We have assessment weeks where they don't fit in with the NCFE assessments, but I can use those to do practice assessments. So I can plan accordingly and those don't change. I've got my half terms mapped in, and then I've also got the column there with the external assessments. I think it's a really good idea, and I definitely think everyone should be putting their students in for the first attempt, not necessarily expecting them to pass, but at least giving them a chance to have an attempt at that external assessment for that unit 1, have external feedback, and then use that as a planning tool to prepare for their second attempt. And I'm also linking that in with their home learning, and I'm using a lot of the iAchieve extra resources there, fitting those in with the different teaching sessions so that the students can be working on stuff at home that I know is going to support their learning.
Maureen, so, could I just very briefly say, I think one of our guests is from Wales doing the Welsh programme, so just to stress, there's obviously no external assessments on that one in case it just gave you a heart attack, because they're obviously internally assessed, as you know. So
thank you.
Yeah, I should add, really, I've based this almost entirely on the health and fitness course, but obviously the other courses are slightly different and there will be completely different dates and completely different content, but the principles will be the same. So having done that, I then go back to my platform, my iAchieve platform, which will be my main resource. So in class, the resources are going to be what I will use as my main teaching tool. But I'm also really aware that the supporting documents, and these are all downloadable paper-based documents, are going to form quite a major part of my teaching. And I know that because I don't have enough time in class to be able to do everything, I'm going to have to use those to really support students working at home as well. But I've also found some other resources that I can use, both online and paper-based, that I can add in, because some students just need to do stuff over and over again, and doing the same stuff in the same way and just doing more of the same often isn't enough to really embed the learning. They need to try it in different ways. They need to just have lots of opportunities to really learn what I've been teaching them. So I've been looking at some quizzes and some fun game activities, especially if they're working at home, some sort of online quiz-based activities that are fun, will keep them engaged, but are really embedding that learning. So I'm using all of those resources, and then from that point, I start planning my lessons. Now I've put this screen on there because I know that some people, had myself included actually initially, wasn't aware of where to find the extra resources that are in addition to the main online platform resources. So once you've logged in, if you click there, that will take you to the extra resources. It looks like that when you first go in. And if you then scroll down, it takes you to pages of downloadable paper resources. So these are the ones for the health and fitness. If you keep scrolling, you've got the business, you've got the equality and diversity. There's lots and lots of extra things that are not directly linked to the platform, not directly linked to the screens, but that really support them. And a lot of these have been created by teachers in the past who've used them and have said, you know, that we can add them onto the platform, so we know that they work and we know that they're useful. So this is from my sort of overview. I've then gone into a lesson planning stage, and this is an example of one of the lessons and how I've used the resources within that. So our school has a silent do now, that's compulsory, all lessons have to have one. So what I've used here is a little bit of revision. I've used this as an opportunity to go back to the previous session and do a bit of revision on the skeletal system. I actually used that. That's taken from the resources. I took a screenshot, a little bit of Tipexing, and the students had to then label that themselves using their notes if they wanted to. I could do it as an open book or a closed book. I think this was an open book. And so I took away the labels, they relabeled them, and it was quite a nice little way of just starting the lesson with them in silence, but focusing on some learning that had gone before. And then we went through that with the green pens, and it was quite a sort of a settled start to the lesson. So I'm now looking at the cardiovascular system. That's the brand new topic. Most sessions on the iAchieve platform start with this think first activity. And the way that I use this is from the front. So I type in the notes, the students can, I can either cold call or get them to just give me suggestions. And we use this for adding notes, putting this at the front, that the students can then kind of just think about what they already know and try and draw on prior learning. They've all done science, for example, so lots of this will come from science. Some of them have knowledge of their own because they belong to sports clubs and stuff, and so a lot of the information for this health and fitness course they already have. So this is from the front, but I know that in some groups where I've got some students that perhaps have got special needs and just won't volunteer thoughts and answers, they work a lot better perhaps just with their TA, just in a smaller group. So I often will do a small brainstorm individually with one student and their TA, or with a small group of students, and they can do this in their little group first and maybe then feed back to the whole group. So obviously different ways of presenting that same thing but achieving the same end. These are some online brainstorming and mind mapping tools that I've found online. I know lots of people use these in loads of different lessons in my school, and they all absolutely swear by them. I haven't tried them all, but there's quite a few of them there. Have a look at them, see if some of them might suit your students. So then the next session, I'm just starting to teach. So I'm presenting from the front. I've got my screen up on the board, and I will interact with the students either through cold call or question and answer. So I'm going through the materials now with them. I don't need to create a new PowerPoint or anything. This is all there for them. Now, what I'm showing you here is screenshots, because I didn't want to risk the internet going down and everything being ruined. So these are just screenshots, but when you're using these in the classroom, when you click on these blue sections, that then takes you to more information or more detail. So for example, if I clicked on the one that says the heart, it opens up this screen, and this gives me more detail, so I can talk to the kids in a bit more detail about the heart. If they're working on their own, this is where they will be able to update their notes, get more information. I'll show you in a minute how I did the next phase of this lesson, and that enables them to work interactively. You've also got further down on the screen that diagram. So this is what I would use then for my do now for the next lesson. But at the moment, I'm just showing them this as a teaching tool from the front, and I'm taking them through it, and then they will look at it in more detail on their own. So that's my introduction, and that's my sort of 10-15 minutes worth of introducing them to the content. So the next section is where I want them to go back through the content I've just taught them. I just want to check that there's no misconceptions. I want to make sure they've understood it. And so they're working back at their own desk, and I'm just circulating, and they can log in, or they can work on some other activity that I've given them. Now for this particular one, I've given them this card sort that I just happened to find online, and it goes through exactly the same content that I've just shown them on the screen, but it gets them to do something that's a little bit more interactive and just repetitive, but in a slightly different way. So it doesn't feel to them like they're just going through the same stuff. So that was the first sort of 15-20 minutes or so, and then I want them to work on those resources on their own. So the students all have their own login, and I want them to go back to their computers and go back through exactly what I've just shown them, but I want them to do that on their own. Now, we all know that if you say to a student, work on stuff at their own pace, that can, how long is a piece of string? So at that point, I would also give them some of these quiz questions. Now, these are all taken from the resources. So I've just downloaded them and printed them. So they're going back through exactly what I've just shown them on their own, but whilst doing that, also filling in these quiz questions. And all of that I've just taken from the platform. So I haven't had to make or create anything. And I know that I've covered the detailed information that they're going to need for their exam. Also, these are set out to look like exam questions. So by doing these little mini quizzes and extra materials, they're actually preparing for the exam as well. Also in those resources are these, they're called handouts. Now they're brilliant if you've got students who are working independently and are quite able and can just go away and they've got this then as a sort of a detailed summary of what I've already taught. But what I also find these really useful for is because they're Word documents, they're completely customizable and you can copy and paste from them. And you can use them for gap filling, for comprehension questions. You can use them for revision purposes. You can get them to cut them up and put them into the right order. You can do whatever you want with them. And they are a summary of everything I've said in a written form, and I can choose to use them in whatever way I know will suit my students. So what I just showed you were all screenshots. I'm just going to show you now what it actually looks like on the platform. So when you are doing this, you don't need to screenshot them and show them as PowerPoints. You can literally put the platform onto that front screen. This is what it looks like. And either you can be doing this from the front or the students can be doing this on their own workstations, and it instructs you where to click, where to press so that you can get onto the next screen. At the bottom of the screen there, it's got the next section and it's taking me through the next part. And you've got, again, this think first. This appears at the beginning of pretty much every single section, and it's a really good way of introducing a new topic. And we can just save that, and each student, if they fill in details onto that, will save that and it will go into their own area. You've also then got these little cutouts. So where you can see these arrows, that means that it's taking you through each paragraph rather than just having it as one long document. It can take it through in section by section form so that the students have, it's a little bit less overwhelming for them. Again, keep going, next screen, and so on. So it really is very easy to follow. Students will follow, well, students I suspect follow it a lot more easily than I do because they're much more used to working in this sort of format. But it really does guide them through, and it tells you, make notes here, click there, it tells you exactly what you need to do. So it's actually a really user-friendly tool. So obviously we're looking here at a whole range of different teaching methods, but I think, as I mentioned before, one of the things that we've noticed is we now have to sort of update the way we're teaching a lot more, and we're using a much more blended methodology. So I found last year that whereas I was really used to teaching them in front of me, suddenly in lockdown, they weren't in front of me, and I had to rethink the way I was doing things. So I'm just going to go through now my sort of top 10 steps for if you're going to teach the iAchieve materials through a much more blended method where you've got some kids at home, some kids in the classroom, a whole mixture, and perhaps some of them that you literally never see. So the first thing I would say is that we have had to redefine our role completely. The teacher is that critical person who encourages that deeper learning. We could just give them the resources and say, go away and work at your own pace. But that won't work in terms of teaching. That will work in terms of giving them the information. It won't ensure that they've actually learnt it. So the teacher's role is much more now as an instructor, but also a facilitator, the assessor, making sure that those students are not just doing but also learning. Planning the curriculum I've already mentioned, and I really strongly believe that writing down what you intend to teach for the next 2 weeks or the next half term or year is essential, particularly because blended learning has so many variables. Sometimes you will have the students in the classroom, sometimes they'll be at home, some will be self-isolating. We still have bubble closures occurring from time to time, but you also have students who don't attend lessons for all sorts of other reasons. So planning is more important than ever because we've still got to hit those deadlines. Making sure each individual lesson has a clear learning objective. It's quite easy to drift and just work through the resources, but it's just important to be clear what you expect students to learn from every single lesson or teaching episode or section of a lesson, so that you can measure the classroom and student performance in real time, so you can see at the end of a sequence if they have achieved the learning or if you have to go back and revisit your planning. I think choosing the right technology tools is really important here as well. I found so many fantastic little quizzes and games online that are all free, great fun, didn't actually teach them anything. It's so important that we use the tools that we're using to enhance our teaching rather than the other way around. Sometimes we think, well, I want to teach that, so I'm just going to use that tool for it. We can use them and draw from them. They've all got different uses, and we know what our students work from best. Some students really don't work very well from games and quizzes, and they just need the words and they just want to read it, whereas others will much prefer having it being much more interactive and much more colourful and games focused. So knowing your students, using the right technology tools for them. The classroom has to be almost rearranged sometimes, because we've now got students working with you from the front, but you've also got sections where they want to work on their own, and sometimes actually being away from the screen so that they're becoming more independent and they're not leaning on you so much. But also, if you want them to do stuff that's on paper, you kind of want them away from the distractions of the screen completely. So it's kind of thinking about how you might be able to rearrange the classroom to facilitate that best. And also thinking about if you are streaming some of your teaching to students who are working from home, simple things like where are you going to put that camera and where is that mic going to go so that they can actually follow the lesson are really important, and things we've never really had to think about before. So you do really need to know the content inside out, and as a non-specialist, this was something that I found as soon as I knew exactly what I was teaching and how it was working, it just gave me confidence to be able to plan my lessons much better. Getting to know that content, but also getting to know the timings. When do those projects have to be submitted? When is the deadline for getting the assessor to come into your school to look at them? All of that kind of stuff, the assessment dates, registration timings. If you miss the dates for registration, not only is it costly financially, but it could mean that some students don't get entered for the qualification. So having all of that content at my fingertips just gave me real sort of confidence to plan forward. Because the teaching here is sometimes entering students' homes or working with students who are working perhaps in the library separately because they're not able to attend lessons, being able to make those students independent is the culture of that lesson has to be set in advance. We need to have a real culture of respect and collaboration and support. And sometimes in the classroom, students helping other students is almost more beneficial than us facilitating their work. So if we've set up that culture in the first place, it helps us and gives us a lot more time in the classroom as well. So providing clear instructions and routines for games and quizzes. Simple things like knowing how to log into, obviously, the iAchieve platform, but also if they're going to be using other quizzes and other games, the amount of time that's wasted where the kids are saying, oh, I can't remember my login. So that kind of thing is something we need to absolutely nail early on. But also expectations for online activities. Are we allowing them to call out? Are we allowing them to share their screens, etc., etc.? All of that, because there are safeguarding issues here as well. All of that needs to be really clearly explained before anything like that begins. Blended learning and the sort of online aspect of these courses just really can lead to huge impact when it's measured on an ongoing basis. And if we've already decided on our goals and objectives and outcomes for each lesson, it's actually fairly easy then to review the achievement and track and assess the progress of all the students. And also with quite a lot of this, the online tools enabling self-marking, it's actually quite time-saving if we can use those to our advantage, and helps us to keep records of the students' progress, but also then enables us to go back to our initial planning and see which bits we need to maybe review. And then the parents. This, to me, is a no-brainer. For so long, I didn't think about involving the parents in this process at all. Not really until we went into lockdown. And then obviously I realised that because the students were working at home, and quite often the parents were working at home or were at home, they were one of our biggest resources and such a useful tool. So because it requires communication with everyone, students, teachers, other individuals, a lot of the parents didn't quite get the idea of the technology to start with, but by enabling them and helping them to help us, they were able to then get the best interest and buy-in from their children. And I did actually end up sometimes having some parents joining in with some of the quizzes, which was brilliant because it just meant that the kids became very competitive, shall we say, wanting to beat their own parents, and the parents really kept them on task. So that was really, really useful. So don't forget those parents, especially if you're using the iAchieve resources and setting work at home, get them involved as much as you possibly can.
When thinking first tasks are completed, they save to the journal. Can the journal be edited, and how do you use the journal going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, just thank you so much for that, Maureen. I think that was really, really helpful. And I think whatever program or iAchieve calls people teaching, I think you can really clearly see, how, it can be adapted. So thank you for that. And thank you for the question as well about the journal. Yes, as you've said, when learners are going through their work, there's frequently places where they can add notes to their journal, and you can't edit them as such, although you can go back and add to them if you go into the dialog box that you made it from. And then the idea is going forward that students can use those notes that they've made a bit like a learning log. So I can show you some examples actually, if that would be helpful, but both the teacher and the student can use that journal, and they can make additional notes when they go into that journal area. So if I just share my screen, this is where you can see examples of people's journals. So if I just click into this eye icon on the right hand side in my list of students and go in, so if that student hasn't got any notes in, I think I have got one. Yeah, so so here, for example, these are just the notes that have been made as I've gone through and entered, some reminders to myself or some notes that I've gone through, and so I can just use those later. That's the idea, to help me prepare for the assessment. So in the case of equality and diversity, for example, there might be some definitions or some explanations about things. I just could save those into my journal, and then when I'm starting to work towards the assessment questions that correspond to that area, I can just remind myself, you know, what was being covered. And I think the other thing that I think they're reasonably useful for is you can, as a teacher, just see to what extent the student is really engaging with the subject as well. You know, the journal I went into by mistake just before this one, it was absolutely empty, and it kind of was saying to me, well, that student isn't really engaging in quite the same way as this student is, where they've really made little entries for almost all of the topics. And then as a teacher as well, I can use this new post function to make a comment for that student as well. So if I know they're working remotely on something and, you know, I want to direct their attention somewhere in particular, I could make a note and they would see that in their journal. So that's really just quite simply what that is and what it's intended for. It's not, you know, the be all and end all, but it's just meant to be an extra little revision tool for the students. Any other questions from anybody? Well, if not, that probably brings us towards the end of the session then. I want to certainly thank everybody for joining. I hope you found it useful. Thank you very much indeed to Maureen. Really appreciate that. I think it's been absolutely brilliant for just helping understand exactly the best ways of using that. And we are going to make this available as a recording. So if you want to have that as a reminder, please let us know and we can send it to you. But otherwise, I think we're finished. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. And please get in touch if we can help you any further. Many thanks.